The views and opinions expressed during Love and Life with Lana and Dave are those only of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or the position of our podcast hosts or affiliates. Any content provided is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, anyone, or anything. All right, let's do it.
You're listening to Love and Life with Lana and Dave, the podcast where logic is power and you take control. Thank you for tuning in and making the choice to listen in and get ideas for your own love and life. Now, here are your hosts, Lana Williams and David Vaccaro.
All right, this is Lana here. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about Halloween. Specifically, and I'm going to use the title of this, Halloween and the Logic of True Crime, because true crime is becoming kind of a popular thing. So what I'm going to do is get into a little bit of the tradition of Halloween, just sort of like the overview of Halloween and the reason that all of us celebrate Halloween, how all of us specifically see Halloween, or maybe not all of us, but how we see Halloween in different ways, depending on who we are. We may get something that works for us depending on who we are out of the holiday. Without getting into the history of Halloween, because I think we've probably all heard the Halloween history a million times. We're not going to really dwell on that so much. But I'm going to get into Halloween, kind of what psychologically we get and celebrate on a Halloween, in a Halloween type environment. And then, you know, what different emotions or different types of, you know, not only brain chemistry, but biological responses we have to Halloween in general. Some of us really love it. Some of us are not so excited about it. And we all, let's say that Halloween is one of several holidays, and we all like different holidays for different reasons at different levels of intensity. So we'll get into that a little bit. Then we'll get in a little bit into some of the myths and things that go around on Halloween that we've heard over the years. And I honestly, if we can, we'll try to see if we can't break down what the point of things like that is. Get a little bit into horror movies and films. And then, you know, dive into true crime and sort of see if we can't make some connections based on what we've already discussed. So, you know, starting in the beginning, Halloween is about fear, or mostly about fear. For some people, fear isn't their strong suit. It's not something they want to deal with. It's even joke around about, and that's fine. I believe just about everything in the world is on a sliding scale. So I believe there's a balance in just about every topic or every situation you can come up with. So I don't think Halloween is any exception, in the sense that some people really love the holiday and they start a month before the holiday comes and they like to decorate. Some people love to decorate, create an environment, stand back, look at it and say, look, this is why I love Halloween. I like to, whether it's interior or exterior decorating for this, you know, for the holiday. Some of it is for their own benefit, and some of it is to just make people happy in the neighborhood, make people that, you know, like to drive around and look at lights or decorations on lawns and that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of validation going on there. But for the most part, it's supposed to be known for fear. And it's not, it depends again on what type of person you are. You may be somebody that kind of likes the idea of Halloween, but you don't really want to go to haunted houses, or you don't really want to watch horror movies, or you don't want to really do things that are actually going to scare you. You're just like sort of interested in the theme of it, but not necessarily to put yourself physically into it. And that's fine. Some people, that's enough for them. Again, that's a mild way to celebrate the holiday, or just getting your kids, if you have younger kids, getting your kids dressed up. Some parents and adults love the holiday as well, and they as adults will dress up. There are parties for adults out there. There are all kinds of different things that adults do as well as kids. But for kids, it's sort of something we all celebrate in one way or another, right? Not saying that Christmas isn't the same way, because Christmas is also a holiday that adults appreciate celebrating in their way. And as much as you think Christmas is for kids, there's a lot of people who love the holiday. They love to decorate, and there's certain things that, I know a lot of people that love Christmas, the holiday, and like to dress up for Christmas in whatever way. They like to, whether they make themselves out to be an elf, or maybe they, dress up for as Santa Claus and, go to different places and talk to kids, whatever it is. It's really no different from Halloween, with the exception of what it looks like, the theme, the colors, and that sort of thing, and the background of it. So basically, if you think about it, fear on Halloween is contained. It's safe. It's not something that's actually going to happen to you. And it's going to matter of what the intensity is of that fear being tested, I guess you could say. I have friends that will go and walk through haunted houses, and that's all they do. They walk through haunted houses, typically sometimes in the dark, sometimes during the day, sometimes and I mean haunted houses as in there are houses in my area that are actually haunted properties, properties with things that have happened and that kind of thing. One of them is The Conjuring. I live in an area where The Conjuring house is something that's within reach. So that's a very popular spot. I also live south of Massachusetts, and Salem, Massachusetts is a very huge Halloween. If you're from this area, you'll understand. Salem, Massachusetts is like a carnival this time of year. It's just crazy. There's a ton of people. There's a ton of events. There's a giant Ouija board there that there is a park there, and there's a huge Ouija board that you can actually stand on. I mean, they are not kidding around in Salem. It's a huge all-day event there. And there's all kinds of different, I can't really even get into how many different things that are going on in that area. It's actually very hard to get to this week. It's like the type of thing that if you go to Salem, you almost want to get situated like in a hotel room within walking distance, because if you try to drive over there from here, like tonight, you almost can't get in there. You can, but it's like you've got to park your car 3 miles away and walk because most of the roads are blocked off. It's that crazy. But that's the kind of thing that some people love to do. And again, it's going to depend on your intensity. My personal thing, I've kind of dressed up for Halloween, to be honest with you. It's never been really a big deal. I just don't. It's not like I don't know. It's not something I've ever liked. I also don't like other people that dress up. As a kid, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and all that kind of stuff was not something I liked as a kid. Or going to the circus and having that. I mean, the clowns at the circus were just the last thing I wanted to see. As much as most kids think it's great, but like anything that's in a costume for me, I'm older now, so I understand that there's no big deal and it's not something I should be afraid of. But as a kid, I was horrified of that stuff and not interested. So maybe that's why I don't really care much for costumes. However, I love horror movies. Love them. You know what I mean? Especially the old classic ones, especially horror movies, of course, that I watched when I was a kid. And as a tradition every year, anybody who knows me and knows my Facebook page can tell you that I pretty much theme my Facebook page day by day with some different horror movie, right? Something that some people like to watch. Other people probably find obnoxious, but that's fine. So that's my thing. Some people, like I said, like to actually tour properties. We're also not far from a couple of places in Massachusetts and the Lizzie Borden house is another one that's very close to this area. So between the Conjuring house and Salem, Massachusetts, and there's a couple of areas out in Westport, Massachusetts, and there's a couple of other properties here and there that are like old houses that have had serious tragedies going on in them that have now become a tourist attraction. Newport is another place. That's something that people love to do. They want to be scared. Whether they go out with people that are trying to track the paranormal or they're going through tours in these houses. Some people like actual haunted houses. Others like the seasonal haunted houses, where you go in and they set up a bunch of things for you to walk through, and they scare you. Some haunted houses are actually set up so that they touch you during the process, and some people actually seek those out. Others really don't like to be touched. So again, it's all going to depend on your personal preference. Or there's something for everybody that celebrates Halloween in whatever way. Some people don't really care much about anything except they want to make sure the kids look really cool and they take them trick-or-treating, and that's their big thing. Some people absolutely love to just be handing candy out. That's their whole thing. That they love it. They like to go to the store and buy, skids and skids of candy, have the big candy bars or whatever it is, whatever they're known for. Some houses in every neighborhood are probably stuff that you could probably remember as a kid, a house where you knew that was going to be where the good candy bars were. Like, this particular house is always like that every year. You got to hit this house because this is the best house to get whatever loot you can, and make sure that you get the best kind or get there early before they run out or whatever it is. There are also houses that on the trick-or-treating nights will get there and they'll decorate their house from top to bottom, and they'll get in costume and they'll put stuff out on their lawn, and they'll make it a complete experience to go to their house on Halloween, and that's their thing. But talking about what we like about the holiday as far as fear is concerned, fear is contained within Halloween, and it's a little bit of there is an adrenaline rush that comes from that. And I believe that depending on how high of your adrenaline rush because you can get addicted to adrenaline. We ask anybody that jumps out of planes and does bungee jumping and all that kind of stuff. That's something that your body can become very addicted to, roller coasters and things like that. So horror movie is sort of like that in an amusement park in a way, in that your body has a biological response to something that it sees or experiences or whatever the case may be. So when it comes to Halloween, some people really like their anxiety and their adrenaline. That's the fear. That's the chemical that causes the fight, flight, freeze in someone. So what I mean is, you're walking down the street, you see a bear. Your body's going to either give you enough adrenaline to do whatever it is that you need to do to get you out of that situation. We've gone through this before, and I am going to bring Bonnie back for some more brain chemistry stuff because that's really cool. But you have a limbic system and you have an amygdala, and your limbic system will kick in. Your limbic system is the thing that kicks in when you are driving down the road and somebody comes out of nowhere and you hit that. There's a couple things that are going to keep you safe, but you don't have time to think about. And your limbic system kicks in when you're in some threat, you're in danger. But what horror movies do, or what haunted houses do, or there's places that will set you up for that limbic system to kick in and the amygdala to kick in and your adrenaline to rush without actually you actually needing it for any danger. Some people are very interested in that rush. They like that adrenaline rush. They love it, but they don't really want to have to use it. It's just, right? Jumping out of a dark room or jumping out of nowhere and scaring people. Some people like that type of scare. I personally hate that. Don't like it. I don't like surprises. I don't like people jumping out. It all depends, of course, if you have a childhood where that is not a good thing. To replicate that to somebody as an adult is not necessarily the best thing to do. And so what I try to do, although there are people out there that will say, well, that's no fun. Well, some people came from childhoods and backgrounds, abusive backgrounds and things like that were not fun. Some children, watched their parents die in a car accident. Some children, were dealing with hiding in a closet when one of their parents came home drunk and had to worry about whether or not they were going to get their ass kicked that night. That kind of stuff will resurface with certain types of jump scares and things like that. So unfortunately, yeah, maybe it's no fun to you, but some people actually have trauma that is triggered by stuff like that, right? So again, I come from Gen X, so a lot of my generation is really to blame for that kind of, oh, you're just no fun. Just deal with it. I get it because I grew up like that. But Halloween should be, in a way, I hate the word should. I know that I shouldn't be using this, but I shouldn't be using the word should. Listen to that. Anyway, we should be able to enjoy something at our level with our consent. So Halloween should be a consented experience. So nobody should force you to deal with Halloween in a way that they think you should deal with it. Just like anything else. And that goes into a lot of different areas, including Christmas, including Valentine's Day, that I'm not going to get into right now. But you should be able to approach Halloween, and you should be able to celebrate it any way you want to celebrate it, without violating other people's boundaries. So anyway, fear, it's contained, it's safe, and you can experience it at your level. To me, a horror movie is fairly safe, but there's a period there's something about, well, for me, the classics are the classics, so I don't really get a lot of jump scares and things that don't see coming, because the stuff that I watch is stuff that I've seen every year. So I know how it ends. I know what it looks like. I'm more interested with horror movies, I'm more interested in dialogue and story arc and makeup and things like that. Things that would go into just about any other movie. For me, horror movie is just something that I just watched a lot of it as a kid, and I'm not even sure if there's a reason why I like that particular genre. It just happens to be a habit for me, I guess. I haven't watched a whole lot of new movies, but I will say that this year I did watch the Smile series, which I swore that this year I would watch some new stuff. And I have, over the past couple of years, watched some new things here and there, and threw some stuff in there that, hey, that looks familiar, that looks interesting. Desensitization is another thing I want to bring up. It's an object or an entity that's familiar, unfamiliar. That something like that can be a source of dread. I know it sounds weird that you would want to feel the source of dread, but we can feel all the things that would go on in a situation where we're in danger without actually being in danger. And again, that's why we like bungee jumping and parasailing and roller coasters, and some people would say, well, why would you want to go through that? Why would you want to see something on a screen that's horrific and all that? And the point of it is for some of us that are realists and know that life is horrible, it's horrible, and this is the way it is. And sure, life has enough horrible stuff without creating horrible stuff or seeking it out on a screen. But the fact that we know that it's not real, and some of us almost want to see something so real that it's on that cusp or that borderline and knowing full well that it isn't. Sure, there are some people who want to see stuff that is real. I don't want anything to do with that. There are some people who really do seek out stuff like that because it's not legal to see it in person. I'm not getting into that. That's an extremely high level of almost sociopathy, but whatever. As long as these people are okay in their daily lives and they're not doing anything harmful. But, if they are looking for stuff that's real because they get a kick out of that, there may be some therapy that needs to be introduced there, and I'll leave it at that. We can bring things closer to us that scare us on Halloween, but that help us sort of desensitize ourselves to actual horror. That sounds really weird, but there's a way that being exposed to horror can reduce anxiety. There's a sliding scale of it, but to some degree, it actually desensitizes us to a real situation. Moving on. Also, role play is a thing that Halloween is adjacent to. So people who love to dress up may be dressing up because they want to be something that they are not. They're trying to do something different than they do every day. They want to be Wonder Woman. They want to be whoever, because of the fact that that's not who they are, and they would like to role play through some of it's just for fun and humor, and other stuff is like really elaborate. I mean, there are people who make such elaborate costumes that it's to the point where you don't know who you're dealing with, or you don't know who you're looking at, or I've seen people make some costumes that are like, I know a few people that are have done movie props and things like that. And so people like that, when they make costumes, it's just amazing to see. Or people that are really into fantasy photography that will, take a person that's an everyday person and make them into some movie character, Disney character, Lord of the Rings character, whatever it is, but like to such a degree that it's like stunning to see, just to get these big portrait shots or these shots of bringing people out into the middle of the woods or putting them in a scenario where everything in the picture is just like amazing. That's kind of cool to see. And there are people that enjoy Halloween in that way. And so that's just another thing that like they have no interest in the fear aspect of it, no interest in the horror movie aspect of it. They just like to dress up. That's their thing. And on Halloween, they can just be someone else. Sometimes some people just don't want to be who they are for a day, and Halloween's a great way to express that. So there's also that. And different forms of scareability is basically what we're talking about, but also people just morphing into some character like that they would have always wanted to be, or whatever the case may be. Now, I've done some, I'll have to pull those pictures out from the history, but I have done some costumes. I did a ballerina one time. Once I did I Dream of Jeannie, with the long ponytail, the whole bit. And once I did a pirate, things like that. There have been times, most of the time that I've dressed up, I've actually dressed up because I'm a DJ and I've just had to be in costume for work, or it was that kind of thing where I would be, over the years, I've like not done it as much as I used to because there's a lot to it. And I don't know, I'm not a shopper, and going and trying to find this piece of this and that and this particular item and, to put a costume together is tedious for me for whatever reason. And it's like you put it all together and you do something for one night, and then if anybody sees you, then you can't really be doing that like 5 nights in a row. For me as a DJ, we used to have to DJ. We used to have to do a club night where it would be 3, 4, 5 nights in a row for Halloween, and we couldn't wear the costume twice. So it just got really tiring, and it got to be really exhausting to try to put together 4 costumes. And my friends that are DJs out there know what I'm talking about, bartenders and everything like that. They get it, because this particular year, because it's a Thursday, the previous weekend, last weekend, which was probably started on Friday. I think Friday's probably where really it kicked off, although I think for some people they did last Thursday night is where they really got started. It's just been one Halloween party after another for like 8 days. So, when Halloween actually arrives, it's just kind of like, oh my God, I'm not sure that we can even like stand to do anything on Thursday night because we've been going for so long. And for friends of mine that are in the entertainment industry, whether it be bartending, whether it be social venues, bars, clubs, restaurants, things like that, whatever the case may be, where they've had to dress up and they've had to entertain, most of them are wiped out right now, like because it's for some reason there's just been so many parties because of the way that Halloween fell this year that everybody's really waiting for tomorrow to come and go and be done with it because they're tired. And it costs a lot of money to put these costumes together, unless you have stuff like sitting in your closet, which, some people do. Some people love it so much that they've just got stuff aside, but you can only be the same person for so many parties until it starts to get old. So anyway, that's basically why we like Halloween, and the different people that like Halloween do and why they do. And so the next thing I want to get into is just real quick. There have been some, I heard a rumor of this year. I can't remember what it was about, but we've had like over the years, these scares that come and go, like, oh, if you go here, they're going to do this. Just something to make people have always come up with a thing to try to make people afraid to do anything. And so the oldest and probably most common scare in the book, or that anybody remembers, is the razor blade apple deal. And I actually went and looked at this up one time, and there's a podcast called American Hysteria that I kind of love because they get into stuff like this. And they did a whole episode one time on just like these false scares that people are hearing about that go around that cause an issue. And one of them was a razor blade apple thing. I believe once they got into it in the second, they probably did get into this in several more movies, but the only movie I ever remember seeing it in was in the second Halloween 2, where a kid walks into, there's this whole thing going on where Jamie Lee Curtis is coming into a hospital and the whole thing like that. The whole movie is set in a hospital. But anyway, when you first start seeing the hospital scenes, there's a kid that gets brought in with his mother and he's bitten to an apple and got a razor blade. Now, from what I understand, or from my research, that's not ever actually happened to anyone. There's nothing on record about that. But somebody mentioned it or somebody got everybody nervous about it, and it went on for decades. And people still talk about it. Like, make sure you this and that. Same thing with like push pins and things like that. That they've never really found any evidence of like that actually coming into an emergency room or that actually being a medical case anywhere. The next thing would be Bubblicious gum and that whole thing about spider eggs. I don't even remember why that started, but I just remember as a kid hearing about that. And the interesting thing about that was like that actually created a problem with like Bubblicious sales. I don't know whether they went out of business over that or not. It never was true, and there was no ever recorded case of it. But the rumor was so bad that like they actually started losing profit. I don't know whether they, like I said, they shut down entirely or they had to do something to divert people and whatever to get back on the shelves and get some of their products sold. But that actually caused a problem with them selling gum. Bubblicious bubble gum. Anyway, there was another thing about cocaine in these candy straws or those pixie sticks or whatever, that people were opening them up and putting cocaine in them and taping them shut or sealing them shut or whatever. That also was never something anybody could record in history as like having happened. I think there was one case of it happening, but it had to do with like a husband and wife, and it wasn't a Halloween thing at all. It was like, and it was very easy to detect for the person that did see it. And it never caused any harm. It was just like something somebody caught before it went wrong, but it wasn't anything having to do with Halloween or kids or anything else. So these kind of things go around. And I just wanted to mention that it's just a really good thing to do sure, you want to be safe and you want to make sure your kids are okay and you want to inspect the candy. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. Of course, as a parent, you should do that. As an adult, you should just do that with anything that's packaged. Just to be careful with everything that you put in your body, right? But especially with your kids, are concerned and people handing out candy. I totally get it. But also, let's not go too far. Definitely do your research about what you're hearing and make sure that like what you're hearing is like a valid, legit thing. There's a thing going on. I'm going to digress for 1 second. There's a thing going on where people just don't want to look things up. I don't know what's going on. And people are just sort of taking stuff like that, at rampant stuff like that at people's word and just spreading it. And it would really be a good idea if people could stop for 2 seconds and when they hear something, just look into it for a little bit, just to be sure what they're hearing is a valid rumor. It just doesn't make sense to spread it and be afraid of it if there's been no cases of it. And it's real easy to fall into what I would call a slippery slope thing where, well, sure, it hasn't happened, but it could happen. It hasn't happened, but it's definitely something that could easily happen. Yeah, sure. But let's look at history and let's give some validity to the fact that it has not happened. And sure, it could come across somebody that decides they want to do it, but let's not panic the entire neighborhood over something that nobody's ever seen happen and there's no history of. That's all I'm going to say. So, again, I got into horror movies. I like my classic stuff. I watch that every year. I watched a lot of remakes as a kid, so I remember hearing from my mother that the stuff that I was watching was stuff that she watched before I did, and it was just a new version of the stuff she watched as a kid. And so now I'm in her point of view where I think the movies that I watched were the best thing ever. And most of the movies that I grew up watching have been remade. And of course, I'm disgusted by all of them. Like I think this is just a circle of life where I just refuse to accept. I watched 2 movies that were remade, and my opinion on both of them taught me a lot about myself. One was the Halloween that was remade. And there are some things that changed and made it a different kind of story. And I didn't like the fact that it was a different kind of story. I kind of like my story the way I like it. I like it to be unfolding the way I like it. And then a little while later, I watched The Omen, the remake of The Omen. And that was identical to the original Omen. I think with the exception of maybe one or two things, it was like it followed it to the letter. And I didn't like that either. So I realized that I just don't like remakes. I don't like them, whether they're the same or whether they change them or whatever. I just don't like anything that's a remake of something that I already like. So that's the thing I learned. I've not watched Poltergeist, the remake. I've not watched Carrie, the remake. I think I started to watch it, and, of course, at some point, 5 minutes in, I decided I didn't like it for some reason. So I realized the reason I like the ones I like are because of the age I was at when I watched them. And I'm not going to like remakes, so I'm not going to try to make sense of it or try to watch it, or I'm just not going to bother. I can understand where my mother's coming from now because of something like The Thing when she was a kid, although it was in the 50s. So, yeah, she probably was 10 or whatever. And I was around the same age when I watched The Thing in the early 80s. And so, to me, that's like amazing. If I go back and try to watch her version of it, it's not really that exciting. And I believe they redid it again, and I've not watched it since. It's kind of like it, I know now that it's tied very much to my childhood, and I like what I saw then. And so that's why, I like that. I'm going to watch that. Now, I've seen other movies that have nothing to do with anything I've ever watched, and those are good because I don't have any history or anything to compare it to. And so it looks like that's probably going to be my best bet when it comes to watching newer horror movies, that they're just not remakes, because that doesn't work for me. So then we get into the true crime aspect of it, and we can make some connections there, right? With true crime. True crime is pretty popular at this point. It's been, personally, I've been watching true crime since the 80s. So I'm not new to it. I think the reason that it's more popular now is because of the podcast era of cable TV, because when I was a kid, we only had a specific amount of channels. And in the 80s, there wasn't much that you could watch. There were ABC and CBS type shows, that kind of thing. And there wasn't that much out there. There might have been some. Sure, there were. It depends on whether you like fiction or not. I'm personally not a fiction person. So it was really hard for me to, as a kid, there wasn't much out there for me to watch as a kid that was like documentary oriented, because that's really what I'm interested in. I don't want to see dramatizations of stuff. So Law and Order, and trying to think of some of these LA Law and some of these shows like that, really, they were okay, but I really wasn't a follower of those shows because I really didn't have any interest in dramatizations of stuff. If I was interested in a storyline, it was typically the main storyline, or the actual origin storyline that somebody was following. Ripped from the headlines is just not interesting to me. And then I think at some point we got into cable TV in the 90s, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was 86, 87. There weren't very many channels back then, but court TV was a thing that came around, and A&E, very early A&E was pretty much mostly crime-based, and that was what they did. So things like City Confidential and American Justice, and I know that Unsolved Mysteries was kind of a thing, and I know that all those shows back then, those are the ones I watched, because it was like I wanted to know what was actually happening. I wanted to see stuff that was actually going on. So that's really where I started, with Bill Curtis and with, I think, American Justice, and what was the other one? There was 911 with William Shatner. So anyway, there's a bunch of stuff like that. And that was really the stuff I followed. I've always been following stuff like that, and I love to kind of go back and look at that stuff. But in the 90s, I like I'd probably say the early to mid 90s is really where that stuff got good. That was a really good time for crime shows. American Justice, I guess. I'm not remembering. Oh, there's one show that I can't remember for the life of me while I'm doing this, of course, that you would actually call in if you knew something like that. Obviously, all the shows do that now, but there was a point in time. I can't remember. But anyway, there was a show that where you would just be calling out fugitives that they were looking for, that kind of thing. America's Most Wanted. There were a couple of stories from my own hometown that went on there that I honestly wouldn't have known about otherwise, except for this particular show with City Confidential, American Justice. Those were the two shows that I loved the most. Anyway, I'm a big fan of that. Always have been. Always will be. I've always been a fan of true crime, but I mean, that's where that stuff began. And I was reading like Helter Skelter as a kid. You know, this is the kind of kid I was. You know, as much as that book is disturbing, I think I read it twice as a kid, and I think a third time in my 20s or something like that. I remember I was working in a radio station for 10 years, and I remember at the beginning of that, I was sitting at a radio station. I worked an overnight shift. And like an idiot, I remember sitting and watching and reading Helter Skelter while I was sitting there by myself on a radio station studio, which, you know, if you've ever seen Play Misty for me, that was like the last place I should have been doing that. But anyway, some of that stuff, there's different reasons why you would watch it. You know, there's a psychological study, or there's a couple of articles where people say, well, if you do watch true crime, there's something going on. There's something wrong with you if you do that. Women are the majority of people that watch true crime, and it sounds weird because we're typically the victims of true crime. I mean, if you watch any true crime episodes, it's typically women and children. Now, that's not the only, obviously men are victims of crime and they're victims of true crime. I'm just saying a majority of the victims are women. It's just the way it is. When it comes to things like, you know, stalking and rape and things like that, it just that's the way it is. It just happens that more women are victims than men in that case. More women are abducted and things like that. So let's make some connections with Halloween and true crime, right? First of all, there's a rubberneck dynamic. That's something that isn't necessarily just a Halloween thing, but the rubberneck dynamics, that's the thing that if you're driving down the highway and you see an accident, you stop and you look and you slow down, and it causes traffic on the other side of the highway because people are curious to see. It's terrible to see a car accident. You don't want to see anybody hurt, but you're also it's very hard for you to look away. There's a whole psychological aspect of not being able to look away from something. That's horrific, whether it's something that you want to see or not, almost. So there's that. There's also, I mean, it's a counteraction to the norm. Let's get back to the rubbernecking for a second. It's counteract to the norm in the sense that your life is what it is, and you go through your everyday thing, and it's blah, blah, blah. And something like a car accident or a plane crash or something like that it pulls you out of this norm and into an exceptional area where something's happening that's extreme and it's above and beyond what you're normally used to. It's not fun. It's not great, but it's also, there's an excitement to it, whether it's morbid or not. There's an excitement to it that we tend to be drawn to. Also, there's an adrenaline aspect to true crime. And again, we know adrenaline is addicting, right? So now we're making connections with Halloween. There's an addiction to adrenaline. And this is the kind of thing, again, where you have this contained adrenaline caused by fear or dread. As you're watching these shows, you kind of sort of, if you watch enough true crime, you kind of can understand where they're going with stuff. But it's the overall understanding that it's, at least in my case, it's stuff that actually happened. If you're watching CSI or SVU or something like that, or, Law and Order, it's a little different because it's fictional, or it's a dramatization of something that has happened. In my case, I watch the true crime that I watch is actual stories, is things that are actually happening to people out there. So it's not so much a jump scare or a shock to me as an underlying sense of dread and, I guess, horror that somebody would do something like that. It's more or less like You start to feel for the families that are going through this and things like that. So there's an adrenaline rush. It's a different kind of adrenaline rush than you would get with a horror movie, but it's still got sort of the same adjacent qualities to it. Desensitization, again, is part of it, right? So there's another connection to make, right? That true crime desensitizes us to things that are happening out in the world without being in the moment and the situation that's actually happening. We're seeing that other people have gone through something and we're aware of it, and we can maybe sort of not be as shocked by it. Now, of course, we don't ever want to condone it or be happy about it. Obviously, that's not the case. But we're like, okay, this is a thing. This is something that's happening. I mean, when you talk to people about stuff that's going out there and on out there in the world, people that completely shelter themselves from it will be be very shocked and disgusted, and that's kind of psychologically damaging to you. And to some degree, if you kind of know about it, it doesn't mean you're okay with it, but it just means I'm not surprised by this. This is the real world, right? Or this is a common topic. Like I said, if it's something that you watch fictionally, then I guess it's a different thing. But I would say even stuff that you see fictionally, with the exception of it being really outlandish in a script or something, is pretty much stuff that happens in real life. You might as well, unless if it doesn't have a fantasy quality to it and you're watching something like Law and Order, most likely, or 911. What, I don't know. I'm not sure. I know these shows, there's all these different shows about 911 emergency things, and I don't really remember all the names of them. I did watch a lot of ER, but I was also really wrapped up in the characters and the character stories. So, but that's the thing. I mean, a lot of that stuff is actually happening. And to some degree, we kind of want to know that stuff happens so that we can understand that this is life. That's just me. I'm a realist, and I think it's good to know that stuff, even though it's not a happy thing. And I don't think toxic positivity is a good idea, to be walking around thinking everything's roses all the time. I don't think it's good for you. And it can get you in trouble. Which brings me to my next point, which is education. Psychology of violators is one reason you would watch true crime. Like, well, what would make, especially realistic true crime and documentaries, what would make somebody do a thing like this? We want to get into the perpetrator's mind and understand like why they would ever create a situation where they would violate someone else like they did, or why they would hurt somebody like they did, or whatever the case may be. Like, what's the motivation of that? Like, we're very driven as human beings to understand what causes things like this. So watching true crime, you can, especially if you watch it over and over and over again, you start to develop patterns and information about people like this. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but as a woman, and this is, I think, why so many women watch it, and I've kind of looked at some studies and statistics and found out I was not wrong. It's very educational for us to know how to prevent things like this. And watching true crime, or at least in my situation, watching true crime of actual documentaries of things that have happened, news stories and things that have actually gone wrong, kind of arms you with some pre-existing or whatever you want to call preview type information you can use to maybe sidestep something that you might not have known anything about otherwise, that you might have walked into in another situation. If you see it happening to somebody, or if you see that it did happen to somebody, in a way, you can kind of say, well, it's a good thing I knew about that. I'll never do that. Some people can really learn from what's from history, So one, psychology of violators and why they would do what they're doing, for either identifying perpetrators or just trying to understand how the human mind works, because it's not something that your mind does, out of sheer curiosity. And there are people who study this stuff. So it's obvious that there are fields of people who study this for a living. So being curious about it doesn't make you a bad person. Also, finding patterns in it. Oh, we've noticed that there's 12 cases of this kind of thing in the country, and they all seem to happen in the Southwest, and they involve this kind of thing. And it doesn't really, it's just a matter of just trying to seek out patterns, or at least for me, everything in life has a pattern that it falls into at some point. And if I can categorize and pattern things, at least for me, it kind of makes me feel better to be able to, I don't want to put people in boxes and things like that. That's not what I mean. But there's so many human beings on this earth, and there's just so little uniqueness to stuff that most things that happen are part of some kind of pattern. So if I watch enough of something, I'm going to catch a pattern. And if I can catch the pattern, then I can predict something. If I can predict it, I can avoid it. And I can also maybe get into the mind of the type of person that would create a pattern like this. That's it. That's why, in my case, I watch it, and it looks like I'm not the only one with that particular mindset. Wanting to understand ways to prevent, understand the forensics. Another thing that I love to do, and I'm sure a lot of people love to do, is to watch people in action with forensics solving something. Here's what people do. The first 48, there's a good example of something where you see a crime, or the crime happens, they get called into the station, the cops get in their car, they're on their radios, they go out, and that first 48, after a crime is committed, how do they handle the crime? Who do they talk to? Like what order does it go in, and how do they collect evidence, and how do they tag evidence, and how do they create something to prosecute or to indict, or whatever it is that they're doing based on what happened. A lot of us don't. For me, I can watch it. I can watch like Law and Order, or I can watch NYPD Blue, or whatever, some kind of cop show. But it's more important for me to see actual crime scenes and actual precincts working crime scenes and actual detectives out doing things. Even if it's after the fact, like something happened 10 years ago, and here's all the people that worked the case, and you just can see like what their process is, right? That's just information that's fascinating to me, because you don't really get to see, at least this day and age, you can see it. But for the longest time, you really wouldn't know what that process was. Like, why are you doing this and why are you doing that? Watching true crime, of course, the first thing you know when somebody's married and that they're killed is that their spouse is like suspect number one. That's not something I would have known years ago. So, or it should be. So when it doesn't happen, like even corrupt precincts and people who don't do things right and all that kind of stuff, that stuff is information that's important, right? Because we're dealing with human beings, people, and no matter where it is, and you are a people. So it's somewhat involves you, even though you're not there and it just somewhat involves you as a human being to be part of society. Making another connection to Halloween, we have controlled fear in a safe place. We're back to that. There's a very tangible fear, especially with realistic true crime, but it's also contained, it's safe, and it's not something that you have to worry about. It's not something that's you're not going to be killed while you're watching this show. You're not going to be killed while you're listening to this podcast, but it's a place that you can exercise your fear without having to fight for your life. There are people who love mystery. If you're like a crime person, you might like mystery movies or mystery shows, or some people just like to solve crimes vicariously through other people. So a lot of these like Law and Order type shows, they do set you up with a crime and they give you something to solve. And a lot of people the true crimes aren't as exciting. They usually pretty much, well, that's pretty much what I thought. Although sometimes there's somebody that comes through town that nobody knows, and it's just like a weird thing, and there's no pattern to it. And for the most part, true crime's pretty predictable as far as, who the target is or who the person who's causing the problem is or whatever. But in these shows, I like to beef it up a lot and give you all these little clues and show you 12 different people that might be a suspect, because it keeps you busy. It keeps your mind working, and it gives you the ability to solve the crime or try to solve the crime along with the show, right? So a lot of people actually love to watch that, and that's their exercise that they get mentally to watch the show. However, there are very, very real sleuths that are internet based. And I'll give you the name of I've listened to a podcast called True Crime Society all the time. True Crime Society, it's not the only one. I'm sure there are several of these, but this is the one I know of. True Crime Society also has they've got an internet source or an internet presence, and with Facebook, Facebook IG. I'm not sure if they're on Threads or Twitter. I've actually not looked at that, but I follow them on Facebook and I follow them on Instagram. On Instagram, they pretty much they do a show every week, and they'll put up, here's the pictures and here's what's going on with this or whatever. Some of the stuff that's happened, it happens in real time, and they're from people who are actually like watching or listening to the podcast. One of the ones I remember would be Gabby Petito. That's somebody that listened to True Crime Society, listened to Morbid, I believe, which is another podcast I follow, and they found out about her. And like we all followed this story of Gabby Petito as it was happening in this true crime little world that we live in. Anyway, True Crime Society has their show, and they kind of promote the show for the week and what they're talking about. And they give you pictures and the story of the thing. And, just so that you have something to follow, a couple of paragraphs in history. But they will also post stuff as it's happening in real time. Cody Alcorn is another one. I think he's southeast. So he's typically posts about Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. I think some of Florida. I think it's Brian Enton or Brian. He also and mostly he does Twitter. So he posts stuff in real time about stuff that's happening. There's a school shooting going on here. There's a double murder suicide going on here, that something that will happen. And here's the details of it. There are people on TikTok as well that are just true crime people that will post updates of things that are happening as they're happening. So, but True Crime Society is a good place to start if you don't follow any of these kind of things, and they will post something that's going on, whether it's an ongoing case or, something just happened 5 minutes ago in this particular town, and here's what we know, and we don't know everything yet. That kind of thing. And True Crime Society has a complete group on Facebook where a story will get posted, and then everything related to that story gets posted, and then everybody starts to try to figure out what's going on. And it's like Law and Order, but it's with real stories. And this person's missing people, whatever it is, it gets posted, and a bunch of people will start going, okay, what do you think's going on here? Well, I don't know. Well, I found this out. I found that out. Oh, I live in the town next to this town, whatever it is. So that's the kind of thing that people love to do. They like to, there are sometimes with internet sleuths, it's a little bit annoying just because if something is really going on and there's a major case happening, some of these people will kind of show up on site or show up at houses or show up at, they'll kind of they get a little bit too excited, and they, what we call go real life, where they just show up to places they're not supposed to be and try to solve the crime over and above the FBI or whoever's involved. And I would say that's probably not the best way to do this. But to be honest with you, some internet sleuths have actually solved crimes because of the fact that they had geo-tracking, or they had some kind of information that somebody else didn't have, and that kind of thing. So it's not completely and totally a terrible thing, but sometimes it does get in the way of investigations and cause problems. So that's that. But that's life, and that's where we're at with the internet now, and there's not much we can do about it. It's not going away. But anyway, those are the things that I wanted to bring up and talk about for Halloween. So hopefully this is entertaining for you. And I would say, if you are a true crime fan, they say psychologically, if you're a true crime fan, it's a red flag. It's a problem. You have psychological issues. I think the reason that, well, I know the reason that they say that, and it may or may not be a bad thing, but maybe we can do something to make ourselves better people based on what we know. If you are a true crime person, you are most likely, you find trauma and disarray and dysfunction comforting, somewhat familiar intimately, as far as you may have had a family where you grew up where this was the norm. And so therefore, and we talked about this in the brain episode from the first season that we've done, if you're used to chaos and turmoil, and this is what your brain's used to, when you get into a safe place and everything is comforting and everything is going the right way, your brain determines that that's boring. It determines that that's dysfunctional because you're not used to it. And if you've ever been in a really tumultuous relationship, you know what I mean, whether it's, I'd say romantic relationship, just because most people identify with that right away. If you're with somebody that, is hot and cold, and there's always something going on, and then you meet somebody that's nice and it's comforting and it's peaceful, you'll realize that something, it's not wrong, but you will feel like something is not right because there's not enough drama, there's not enough turmoil, there's not enough stuff happening to create chaos. It's actually not true. Your brain doesn't know any better but to find it unfamiliar. So if you watch a lot of true crime, it's possible that you may be in a place now where you're fairly secure and comfortable and life is good, but you came from a very traumatic place, and you came from a place that to you intimately familiar means disruption and dysfunction and trauma. So that's just something to look at. Doesn't mean that you should stop watching it or that you're a bad person or that anything should, but it might not be a bad idea to understand that that's why you're drawn to it, right? So there's also a chance that you might start looking at people that you already know as suspicious. If you watch too much true crime, it's possible that it could leak over into your personal life and you could start thinking everybody's wrong for the stuff that you're seeing. So if you watch too much of it, you might want to balance it out so that you don't start suspecting people in your own life of just doing stuff that's wrong because you've seen one too many symptoms in something in some show that you're watching. So that's probably a good, thing to be careful of. You don't want to go too far, and you don't want to start suspecting everybody around you of being capable of it, right? Because that's, your brain could make associations like that. I don't see it that way. Again, if I apply what I've learned from true crime to people I know, they pass because I've already known them for years. But if I was going to put them through the test, they still do. I'm not going to start thinking they're crazy because I watch so much stuff that everybody is out to get me. That's what I'm saying. You don't want to do that. So think about that. But what we did was today we covered, before I go, we covered Halloween. We covered the logic of Halloween and what makes us Halloween fans for whatever reason, and what causes us to be drawn to Halloween, how we traditionally celebrate Halloween. And then we got into a little bit of some of the things that just some of the scares and things that have gone on for Halloween. We got into a couple of like rumor scare type things. We talked about horror films. The one thing I want to bring up before I go, though, is psych thrillers. These psych thrillers that are coming on now are no joke. I'm going to bring up A24, and I'm going to leave it with that. If you type A24 into Google, you'll come up with pretty much a lot of psychological thrillers. Not all of them are scary, but a lot of them are mind-based, psychological. Oh, hey, have you ever thought of this? I bet you never thought of this type movies. And so if you're looking for horror, if you look up A24 for horror, you'll get some. It's not a slasher type thing as like it used to be. Well, there are slasher movies, but if you look at for psychological thrillers, they've definitely changed in the last 20 years to be a lot more. They like to pull a lot of stuff out of your subconscious, and believe me, it's not fun. But there's been a few movies that have kept me up at night, and I guess that's fine because that's the point. That's what they're supposed to do. So, but a couple of them I won't watch twice, and that's all I'll say about that. But so we got into true crime, and we got into the fact that women are a majority of the watchers, and then why people that watch true crime do, like what draws them to it, and then what it says about you to be a true crime person, and what you can do to make yourself a better person based on what you know and based on your habits. So that's it. I wish everybody a happy Halloween. Please be careful out there doing whatever it is that you're doing. Party responsibly. Make sure you check all your candy. If you're trick-or-treating, make sure that you don't put too many decorations outside and kill your electric bill. But tomorrow is November 1st, and of course we'll be heading into Thanksgiving after that. So everybody enjoy your Halloween. I'm going to put a podcast up as I can based on what I have for time and what I have for topics. I'm going to kind of do it that way. Of course, the most important thing for me is to make sure I have guests, but I wanted to make sure I didn't get too crazy and too deep for this. This is, the Halloween day on a Thursday. So I just wanted to do something kind of light and fun. So our website is www.lanaanddave.com. That's where all our podcast platforms are. That's where all our social media is. And I will have a podcast up for you soon. I can't tell you when, but when you see it, listen to it. Download, subscribe, give us a 5-star review if you can, and we'll be talking to you soon. We will see you in November. Bye-bye. Hey, you just listened to Love and Life with Lana and Dave. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share the podcast, leave us a comment or review, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. We'll see you soon.